Hey guys, today we're going to be covering an optimized Act 2 whirlwind farming route. All of what I'm going to say is available in the text below, so if you don't feel like listening to my voice, feel free to mute the video. We're going to start off our run by going to our Boda checkpoint and getting our 5 NB stacks. While navigating the map, I highly recommend using your mighty weapon and swapping only to your scorn for elites. To take down the rare elites, I recommend hitting the 1.54 APS breakpoint in Wrath, assuming you have 80% or more buffed crit chance. The easiest way to do this is to get 2 9% and 1 8% increased attack speed pieces of gear, and then using your Enchantress Focus Mind buff. Make sure that she's tanky enough to survive though. As you can see, I switched back to my mighty weapon immediately after taking down the mob. The reason is that if I were to use my scorn, I would have to waste a lot of time generating fury off the mobs since the density in Boda is quite poor. Ideally, you would want your crit brawler rends to hit close to 2 million damage while wielding your mighty weapon, so that you can take down the large skeleton packs for more XP. Unfortunately, with my current weapon, I'm unable to do that. When you encounter a snake elite mob, I normally try to look nearby for another elite pack to group them up. They're really fast and will be able to keep up, allowing you to take down 2 packs at once. Of course, if your effective health points are really low and can't handle getting hit by 2 mobs at once, don't do this. The other bonus of grouping 2 yellow mobs together is that it allows you to generate fury much more easily. Once again, as soon as I finish killing the mob, I switch back to my mighty weapon. You can use the luring trick on mage wraiths as well. However, they're a bit slower than the snakes, since they don't go invisible, and you have to make sure that you take off your cold SOJ if you're using one. One other bonus of grouping up the mobs this way is that it makes proccing your brawler much more reliable, and often results in faster kills. Now that I have my 5 NB stacks, I'm switching over to my high rend damage setup. For trash mobs, I only need to hit the 1.43 breakpoint, so I can focus on increasing my rend damage instead. If you were using the Enchantress earlier, make sure you switch over to the Scoundrel while in town. In the next zone, the Desolate Sands, there are 7 different spawn locations for the waypoint. The easiest way to orient yourself is by running towards the bottom of the screen. In 5 of the 7 cases, you'll see a cliff formation that will indicate your location. In the last 2 cases, for one you'll hit a wall and know when you're at the bottom of the map, whereas the other you'll find yourself on the left side of the circle. The reason why it's important to clear the entire zone is that the zombie mobs, which provide the most XP, are often clumped and hidden away in the corners. Because of how wide the top and bottom parts of the map are, make sure to clear it in a zigzag pattern to help group up the mobs. Doing this will also lead to the birds overhead dropping down and becoming targetable. If your EHP is low, there are 2 mobs that are going to give you trouble in this zone. The first one are the bees. The obvious way to deal with them is to not path directly into their projectiles. The other one are the vile swarms. They hit hard, have no discernible attack animation, and you can't tell exactly how many of them there are until you start hitting them. The best way I found to deal with them is to preemptively rend them, even if you're not in an ideal position. The idea is that you want to have your rend leeching back the life for you as soon as you get hit, so you'll go right back to full health. You will often get a large event spawn in the middle of the top and bottom portions of this map. I found that neither of these places have events that spawn with a density that makes them worthwhile to run. If you're wondering which mobs I kill, I generally go for everything that's in a group of 2 or more. The exception of this are the rock giants that spawn with the imps, since the imps die so fast. The next stop along our path is the Oasis. Make sure that you use the path to the Oasis checkpoint, since the actual one is in a random location and makes it very difficult to optimally path through this map. Going through and uncovering the map is really important since the snake mobs here are super clumped and can be missed, while in Masters in this zone have upwards of 9.5 million HP. For most people, it may be better to just skip them. However, for me, it didn't really matter. From my testing, I found that there was no significant difference between skipping them and killing them. For the Deceiver packs, one thing to note is that you cannot target them when they're invisible, so make sure that you rend only after they appear. Since they also hit very hard, if your EHP is low, it may be dangerous to just whirlwind randomly around in the pack. I strongly recommend turning on your sound and waiting for the hissing noise, which indicates their rematerialization, to time your rend. By the way, if you haven't been doing so, try keeping track of the way I'm navigating through this map, since I found it to be the best way to clear the Oasis. This zone probably has the highest DPS requirement because the Deceivers, which make up the majority of the mobs, have around 5 million HP, and you probably want to finish them with a single rend cast before they go invisible again. I would recommend having a crit brawler rend of at least 4 million for this zone. This can be done either with a Lacerate or Ravage Ruin. The only thing is that the Lacerate has a smaller range and may be annoying for some people. While you're going through the Oasis, always be on the lookout for the Forgotten Ruins, since you want to make sure that you leave some mobs alive around the entrance. In this zone, I'm going to be switching over to my lower DPS setup that uses a Leoric Signet. In this setup, I'm also going to put on a Nat set for the 2-piece bonus so I can maintain my 90% buffed crit chance. If your gear allows you to one-shot Deceivers outside in the Oasis, you'll likely kill the mobs in here a bit too fast and won't be able to generate much fury from your sprint tornadoes. Also, in this zone, keeping the mobs alive in certain parts is really important for making sure you have your wrath topped off. At the start, I didn't start rending the mobs until I decided which direction to go at the first fort. By the way, I'm not sure if you noticed, but this map has the same pieces that are used in Boda, except that it's a 2x3 map instead of a 3x3 map. Learning these pieces will help you in both maps, since often you'll find elites and skeleton clumps hidden away in the corners. Once familiar with all the pieces, you'll know which ones require you to backtrack. You can just whirlwind through the mobs the first time through and then rend them when you're backtracking. I also wouldn't worry too much about waiting around for the imp mobs to pop up from the ground. They're really fast and follow you around, so if you backtrack, you'll probably bump back in. Now, as we return to the start of the map, we still have some mobs that we kept alive from earlier, Once I'm back in the Oasis, I switch back to my high rend damage gear setup for the Deceivers. In the Oasis, there are two very large event spawns that can be found in the middle of both halves of the map. This one here is the only one that I recommend running, since the other two mainly have fallen spawns which don't give much XP. While in this zone I tend to kill most mobs, I skip the mage wraiths quite often because they have high HP and often are found by themselves. If they happen to be within the vicinity of a large pack of mobs though, I might consider taking them down. One final tip that I have for the people like me who are taking down the fallen masters: when they spawn next to the Deceivers, rend them first and then deal with the Deceivers and come back to rend them again to finish them off. The next zones to run are the Eastern and Western channels. In the Western channels there are two different types of spawns, snakes and skeletons, which are around a 50-50 chance of either. When you find that you have the skeleton spawn, you should rejoice and switch to your lower DPS setup for the same reasons as we did in the Forgotten Ruins. If you have the snakes, you'll need to maintain the higher DPS setups that you had in the Oasis. I've looked over 40 iterations of this map and came to the conclusion that due to the small pieces, there's no real way to know for certain which is the optimal direction to go. You'll run into a lot of dead ends and it comes down to a game of pure luck for how well you do. My one tip is to try to find the dead ends as soon as you can so that you can eliminate that choice. Even with all of these issues though, the mob density in here makes it the best XP per hour spot on this run. In the Eastern channel, you can get either skeletons or a ton of murderous fiends with some bats. In both of these cases, you should be using your low DPS setup. In both the Eastern and Western channels, getting the skeleton spawn seems to net 50% more XP per hour on average versus the other possible spawn. However, even if you find yourself in the worst of the two spawns, it's still worth it to run the entire channel. It's just that good. Even if you're very noob like me and lose your wrath from a dead end, you want to continue and finish the rest of the zone. This run here is actually a really bad demo, and I apologize for that. When I went back to analyze the data, this was actually my worst ever skeleton run. At this point, my wrath has come back up off of cooldown, but I'm not going to use it here. The reason is because this zone is almost over, and the next zone is quite difficult to get to, and I almost always lose wrath. The last zone in this run are the Storm Halls in the Archives of Zoltan Kulle. When we're running to get there, you have to make sure that you stay on the bottom side of the Terminus, or else you'll get a checkpoint that will override the Voda one. The mobs in this zone have pretty low HP, so I would recommend using your low DPS setup. The only mobs that you might have some trouble one-shotting are the Rock Giants and Giant Spiders, which I personally don't think are worth the effort unless you've already rendered them down to low HP. Sometimes the start of the map can be a little bit confusing and there are a lot of dead ends, but as long as you get familiar with the pieces, you should be able to maintain your wrath. Following the entrance, you'll end up at a long corridor which may or may not have mobs. I think it's probably best to enter these corridors with a full Fury Globe so that you can guarantee sprinting through the entire length of it. Occasionally you'll get a small piece in the middle of the second corridor which provides a lot of mobs to slay. At the very end of the second corridor, there'll be 3 different directions that you can go with one of them containing the exit. Sometimes the other 2 platforms are packed with mobs, and I think it's best to check at least one of them and consider the other depending on your Fury situation. Finally, and most importantly of all, in this video I've been running this on MP10. This does not mean that you should be doing it on the same MP. Normally you want to run on an MP where your rend will one-shot the mobs while using a Ravage or Lacerate. As a general rule of thumb, if you're less than 250k DPS with your passives on, you probably shouldn't be running MP10. And that's pretty much it. Those are the stats for the run. Thanks for watching.